Hello and welcome to a special interview with ElsaMarie D'Silva for the Sustainable Fashion Workshop. I'm Runa Ray and your host for today's session. SDG 5 aims at achieving gender equality and empowering all women and girls. Yet, 49 countries still lack laws protecting women from domestic violence. Based on data from 87 countries, 1 in 5 women and girls under the age of 50 will have experienced physical or sexual violence by an intimate partner within the last 12 months. While the numbers are staggering, technology can create a pathway for a sustainable future, and I'm here to discuss just that. ElsaMarie D'Silva is currently the founder of the Red Dot Foundation, president of the Red Dot Foundation Global Safe City, which is a platform that documents sexual harassment and abuse in public places. Under her guidance and leadership, Safe City has become the largest crowd map on the issue of India, Kenya, Cameroon, Nigeria, Nepal. She has several accolades under her belt and has been featured on the BBC, CNN, and WIP. She's also a TEDx speaker and has spoken about her work at the Aspen Ideas Festival and the United Nations, to name a few. Elsa, most welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Runa, for having me. I'm so pleased to be here.
Elsa, you have worked in the aviation industry for 20 years, and in 2013, you decided to make a career shift and empower women and youth using technology. And Red Dot was born. Red Dot Foundation Group basically works on the intersection of gender, technology, and communications. I'm curious how you came across this idea and especially the idea to use technology to help women from harassment.
Great question, Runa. So, all of us at some point in our lives have experienced sexual and gender-based violence, but maybe we didn't realize it or didn't have the vocabulary for our experience or didn't have the courage to report it. But in December 2012, if you recall, there was this young woman, Jyoti Singh, who was gang raped multiple times on a bus in Delhi and then subsequently thrown out onto the street, where she was left to die. And that incident shocked us a lot and it also made international news. At the time, I was cocooned in my bubble in aviation, where I had a pretty fantastic life, and I was in my comfort zone. But within that comfort zone, I was searching for my purpose, and it coincided with this incident where it made me reflect on not only my own experiences, but I suddenly started hearing stories from my friends all around me sharing their incidents. Sometimes you have these moments in a country which are inflection points. It was like our George Floyd moment. And it suddenly opened this Pandora's box where everyone was sharing their stories and talking about their incidents where otherwise they would have kept silent. And it made me think about, if everyone I know has a story to share and none of us have reported to the police, then there exists a data gap which needs to be bridged. Now, prior to that, a month earlier, I was part of a program in Sweden where I was introduced to Harassment Egypt, and they were using crowdsourcing technology to document sexual violence in public spaces. And what we did was took that concept, adapted it to India, and encouraged all our friends to share their stories. And within a few months, it started pouring all these various stories of different forms of sexual violence. So what we do at Safe City is really break it down along the spectrum of abuse. So there's nonverbal at one end, which means staring, leering, ogling. And then you have the verbal forms, which is commenting, catcalling, sexual invites. And then the physical forms of touching, groping, stalking. And then there's rape at the extreme end. But in between, you also have digital forms of showing pornography against the will of a person, taking pictures without permission, indecent exposure and masturbation in public spaces, and so on and so forth. And what we found is that when you triangulate location, category, and category of harassment and the date and time, you start to see patterns and trends emerge. at a hyper local level. That means at the neighborhood level. And as citizens of a place or residents of a place or users of that place, how do you relate to these patterns and trends? Are you okay with it? Do you want to do something about it? And all of us are part of community. So we can definitely use this data, which is anonymized, to mobilize our communities and organize them into action along with institutional service providers like the police or civic authorities or even elected officials. So to give you examples of how we've used the data, we've got the police to change beat patrol timings or increase vigilance. We've got civic authorities to address public toilets, which show up as hotspots. We've also got the Western Railways to accept the data and address things like poor lighting in key areas, or spaces like the overhead bridges that connect the railway station to the other side of the road and are hotspots at certain times of the day and night. So what I'm trying to say is that this data is a unique data set, which otherwise never gets reported. But when you document it on a platform like Safe City, it gives the individual citizen the power and information to improve their own situational awareness to stay safe, but also gives them the power to organize their communities into action for collective change.
No, it's interesting because when I went onto your website and I decided to click through, it was pretty shocking because there was data that happened just few hours ago. And I decided to go to my city and I was shocked to see that there was so much of, you have these buckets, like you said, you have like groping and you have catcalls and, touching. And it was something that was quite an eye opener. But what I want to ask you is, with all this data that you've collected and sharing it with the government and the police, do you see any action actually taken?
Yes. So, a lot of it you will never ever know because these are public maps, right? We don't have staff in Bangalore, for example, but definitely there are people in Bangalore who are using that data.
Mm-hmm.
And unless they inform us, we'll never know. But to give you an example, one of our volunteers, she took the download of the data for last month and she got 3 police stations to stamp and acknowledge it. Now under Indian law, when you give the police such information, they are bound to act upon it. So even though it's not an official complaint, they do have to take note of it, right? So they can then incorporate it in their decision making and manpower planning processes. For example, changing beat patrol or increasing vigilance. But for a community, so it's not always the police. So police is one response to violence, but we take a peace building approach where we are saying we live in communities and the communities need our back. First of all, if we analyze why is this violence taking place, it's because of patriarchal mindsets that promote these harmful gender norms and stereotypes that affect one section of the population. Can we use this data set to bring in that sensitivity amongst the larger collective to say, are we okay in allowing this violence to take place in our communities? Or do we want to curb it? Do we want to disallow it? And interesting solutions have emerged even in that space. For example, wall murals. Since you're an artist, I can tell you, they are very powerful. In many places, outside a girls' college in Bombay, in a community in Delhi, in several communities in Delhi, they've put wall murals at the hotspots. So again, you just don't put wall murals anywhere. You put it at a location where that particular harassment is happening and you depict that picture on that kind of harassment.
Oh my
so
God.
It makes it very local, very targeted.
Very
so
graphic.
Outside a tea stall in Delhi, on a busy intersection, and tea stalls are male only dominated spaces. You don't find women hanging around drinking tea. So the women complained that they were being harassed by the constant male gaze and the men loitering over there. And so they painted with the Fearless Collective. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with Shiloh Suleiman's work, but she conducted this art-based workshop and they painted this huge wall mural with different sections with lots of messages saying, we won't be intimidated by your gaze. We will break our silence. We will take action. We are not afraid. All of this speaking through the wall. So we call them talking walls. And it had such an impact that the tea stall owner, he said he within a week started getting people to move on or correcting their behavior and saying this is not right. Outside the girls' college in Bombay, they painted, sexual harassment is a crime. We don't like being photographed without our consent. And they made a small innovation. Between the panels, they put the sections of the law that make it a crime. And a lot of men stopped to ask us what we were doing. And they said that they weren't aware of these laws. Now, you can choose to say that, oh, they should know it. But if no attempt has been made to publicize these laws, how is anyone to know, women or men, right, what the rights are and what is the punishment for violation of these laws? And then in Delhi, again, they use this outside public toilets, which again are hotspots. And in every place, we've noticed that these simple innovations have such a huge impact on the community because the message being sent is the community here has the back of their women and girls, and they are not going to put up with this violence. And without actually saying a word, through the walls, they are putting community on notice to say, have our backs.
Absolutely. I always have believed in the power of art, and visual communication definitely goes a long way in terms of awareness. But these messages, are there also in local languages? How do you communicate these?
So they are in whatever, they're made by the community. So it's not Elsa deciding what is the message on the wall. They have a discussion on what are the patterns and trends emerging from the data. And then based on that, they decide what is it that they want to showcase on the wall. And these messages are in all languages. So in Hindi, in English, Marathi, maybe in some places where we have worked. And they are interwoven with the art. So it's like, it's by the community for the community, you know what I mean? So it's very, very local. It's a local solution, and it's very, very powerful. And to your earlier question, what has it resulted in? It has resulted in greater awareness on the spectrum of abuse and what are their rights. It has given the women and girls greater confidence in being in public spaces, not only in daytime, but also later in the day. They have negotiated for freedoms, greater freedoms. In India, under the guise of safety, a lot of women and girls' freedoms are curtailed by the family in order to save their honor, And here they are negotiating for greater freedoms to move across the city, maybe for career opportunities or education, or going in for higher education, which may or may not require them to travel. So all kinds of things, And at the end of the day, we also have men and boys who are part of this. So when it's a community-based intervention like this, you give opportunity for men and boys to participate in being part of the solution. And they become sensitized because they hear the pain that women and girls go through when they tell their stories. And you also know the power of storytelling because you use it in your work a lot. And these stories are very important for the men and boys to understand what the lived reality of women and girls are.
That's true. I completely agree. Do you think you've seen any sort of this abuse reduce since you've had the app working, or is it just mostly awareness? But have you, with the murals and everyone coming together, have you seen changes in the positive direction?
So I would say yes. And Runa, because we are encouraging people to document sexual violence, I see the increase in reports as a positive trend. That means people are more comfortable reporting, either because they know of our platform or they are now aware that they are that what has happened to them is a crime. And lastly, also building their confidence to report. Otherwise, there's a deafening silence around
Mhm.
this issue. It's a pandemic.
It's
It's a
true.
pandemic proportions around the world, and yet you don't have data that can tell you. So increase in reporting is a positive sign to me. And I also believe that it's a positive sign for people to be willing to now want to engage on this topic and, participate in action. And when it comes to action, like we were talking earlier, all our programming has an action component. So it's not only about reporting, but what are you going to do as an individual in your part of the country or the world to act on that data?
Mm.
As Red Dot Foundation, we are only the facilitator of collecting and collating this information, but it is really you who now have access to this information that you can use in many different ways. And we try to facilitate the understanding and how people have used this information, the examples I've shared with you. But
Correct.
every day we hear newer examples. So for example, recently one of our volunteers, he chose to go on to a radio station in Calcutta and share this information about the reports in his city. In the slums of Nairobi, in Kibera, they use community radio, but they also engage the religious leaders to talk to the men and boys using this evidence-based data. So there are multiple ways. And when it comes from the community, it's really them taking the agency back to say that this is how we would like to use this information for the benefit of our community.
Very true. Was there something that actually triggered when you were in the complaints division at Jet Airways and Kingfisher to actually think of moving into social justice for women?
So I was never officially in the complaints department. I started my career as a flight attendant. Then I was a safety instructor
Mm.
where I taught pilots and cabin crew safety and emergency procedures. And a large part of my current work is informed from that experience because, aviation is one of the safest forms of transportation, but it is safe only because a lot of money is spent in investing in situational awareness and disaster crisis preparedness. And I believe this information that is on our crowd map helps in building your situational awareness, not to avoid the violence, but to really take it head on and create systems of change. Then my latter half of my career in aviation was in strategy. So in revenue management, pricing, and network planning. So network planning is where we had to optimize the route network and maximize revenue. And the data part or looking at patterns and trends comes from there, because that's what we do in business: use past historical data to identify patterns and trends for current and future business decisions. And that's exactly what we are doing. We are using historical experiences that women and girls have to identify patterns and trends that can be used for community-based interventions. And I do believe that whatever I did in corporate helped me in my current work. And we are able to also work with corporates on safe workspaces because we understand both sides of the story. We understand the issue, but we also understand the corporate work. And we are able to speak that language. About being the complaints officer in 2013, we had a law in India that mandates that all companies which have 10 or more employees must have a sexual harassment policy, must train their employees, have an investigation committee, and have a neutral member on that investigation committee. So we do the trainings, but we also sit as a third party member, neutral member. And at the end of my stint with Kingfisher Airlines, I was that senior official, senior woman leader on that complaints committee.
Fantastic. That brings me back. I'm sorry I'm bouncing around, but it brings me back to this one thought that I had when you said that you actually had women reporting. Now, that was something which we never saw, correct? And now people are getting to be more comfortable because it was always, the woman's honor which had to be questioned. But I also read something else where you spoke about police insensitivity and your new agenda. I'm very curious about this. Please tell me more.
When there's a silence around the issue, it does not benefit any of us. So one is, it furthers this thing that women should put up with this kind of violence and stay silent for the sake of their family and their family honor. But at the same time, when you don't have this data that is being filed officially, you're making a problem invisible. There's just no proof, tangible proof. The numbers don't show it. And therefore, how does the police or the justice system respond? They are not compelled to do anything because they don't have the data. And so they then come across as being insensitive. Also, because we don't talk about it, in many of their homes too, there's violence, and it's become normalized. So we need to make it mainstream by documenting these stories, the more stories. And it's not one kind of violence, right? It happens in different contexts. There's so much of intersectionality as well. So the more data we have, the more we can understand the violence and the context in which it happens, and use that information to bring about sensitivity in different systems. So whether it's the police system, the judicial system, and Runa, that several recent judgments are so patriarchal, right? And that really shows how much of work that needs to be done, because it is mainstream. And this is everywhere, in different families and workplaces, and it shows up in the statistics of women in leadership roles, both in politics and business, etc. So, and then again, the numbers of femicide rates and the participation of women in the labor force. And all of this is because women are not considered important. They are considered to be property. Even under the constitution, if you are guaranteed equality, in reality, it's not being practiced. So it's not only police who need to be sensitized, but it's the whole general public. And we can't do that if the silence continues. And by crowd mapping anonymous stories, we are helping break that silence, but also creating a data set that can be used in the collective sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Talking about gender disparity, I keep seeing it everywhere, not just, even in large corporates. Recently, I just put a post out talking about, where are the women when we just had only men speaking. It's definitely probably going to move in the right direction, and we need to work towards it. But taking up the cause for women empowerment. Now, your new book, She Is, speaks about women leaders in different fields. That was a beautiful book. You got to speak to a lot of women, and it was very enlightening. So could you tell us a little more about the book?
Thank you, Runa. And I'm so glad that you agreed to participate in that book too. So for everyone, She is a book that compiles stories of women leaders advancing the SDG Sustainable Development Goals in India. And we have 33 women across the 17 goals featured. The idea was to build on my point earlier that women are missing in public discourse. And if you don't see her, you can't be her. So this book was an attempt to highlight the achievements of women, also to highlight their achievements across the SDGs, which are so important to our current existence and our future existence, and inspire young girls and young men to follow in their footsteps. And we have such amazing stories. And Runa, what I loved was, I get excited with all these women's stories because a lot of them have challenged the status quo. A lot of them have been first movers in their families. They've gone through so many odds to get where they are. So it's never a linear journey. It's always circular. And I don't know, it's just fascinating to see how much they've achieved. And it also gives inspiration to young women to say that work has already been done, so you can just push the boundaries and push the,
Yeah, never stop dreaming.
Yeah, break more ceilings. It's not impossible.
Exactly.
And yeah, and we have women who are, conserving tigers and leopards to the reefs, the coral reefs. But then there's also you who's, amazing with fashion, using your strength. And that's what I like about it. Play from your strengths. So if you like fashion, you can still work on sustainability and create beautiful things that gets world and global attention. And then you have Shilpi, who's creating a new way of hospitality in these unusual hotels. So I think there's so much to be learned from all these women. There's a couple in agriculture who, again, in agrotech, were the first women over there. There's this other lady, Shweta Tripathi, who has been using drones much before drones were fashionable, and she's so humble about it. So that's what I love about these stories, that there's so much that we just slip in, with so much of humility, whereas somebody else may have like gone on radio and television and tom-tommed about it. But there's so much of substance in these stories, and I love it. And I want the world to hear about these women and meet them and talk to them, because there's so much to be learned from them.
Are you going to be having a new edition coming out? A series of these books? You should. There's
yes,
so many
because
stories.
Because this was so well received, I thought that, India is celebrating its 75th anniversary of independence. And I thought, why not honor 75 women in STEAM?
Oh,
That's science, technology, engineering, art, and math. And so we are currently crowdsourcing names for the 75. So if you have any names, please let me know. And we hope to get the book out by August, before our Independence Day on 15th. And I'm so excited about it because I've already seen some of the nominations and they're amazing,
So all the Indian women who are listening to this right now, you know who to reach out to. ElsaMarie D'Silva from the Red Dot Foundation to be a part of She Is. I think I just have one last question for you, Elsa, and this is to do with gender disparity. I'm very curious to know your views.
We are not a minority community. That's the sad part. We are like, whatever, 48% to 50% of the population. And yet we are treated as a minority. That needs to change. And that can only happen if we as a collective stand up for each other, stand up for our rights. Yes, we will disagree. You don't always have to agree. We are not all the same. But unless you have many models of leadership amongst women, you won't be able to say, okay, this is a great leader, that's not a so great a leadership style. Amongst men, you have so many different kinds. So you can make those comparisons, but we have so few women that when one woman fails, all of womankind fails. She carries that burden on her shoulders. So we need more women to step up and be courageous about it, so that we can showcase many more styles of leadership.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Elsa. You have been enlightening. I've written these words down: empowering, hopeful, and also a little bit sad. But with a woman leader like you, I know we can push away the sadness. We can definitely move through the harassment that is faced by a lot of women. Hopefully things will change. And thank you so much. Congratulations for the launch of the new book. Looking forward to the new one. The Red Dot Foundation, the Safe App City. Stay safe.
Thank you. Thank you so much.